All right, so buckle up, everybody, because today we're diving headfirst into the world of Regus Careers.
That's right. We've got a whole stack of their marketing materials here, the kind they use to reel you in.
Yeah, all those glossy brochures and slick websites that promise you the world.
Exactly. And our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to decode all that corporate jargon and see what's really what.
We're going to figure out if Regus is truly the dream workplace they make it out to be, or if there's, a little more to the story.
Right, like are there any hidden catches? Is it all it's cracked up to be?
Exactly. And to kick things off, let's just look at this one stat, okay? 4,000 locations in 120 countries.
Wow, that's a lot.
I mean, they are everywhere.
Yeah, and that tells you something right off the bat, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This is a company that's on a serious growth trajectory.
Right. So what does that mean for someone who's thinking about working there?
Well, it could be good news if you're ambitious and you want to climb the ladder quickly.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Because more locations probably means more opportunities for advancement.
Right, and think about it. If you're looking for international experience, Regus could be a fast track.
Oh, I see what you mean. Because with a global company like that, you might get a chance to work abroad sooner than you would at, say, a smaller company.
Precisely.
Okay, so they've got the global reach, but they also offer a pretty wide variety of workspace options, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. They've got your traditional offices, they've got co-working spaces, they even have virtual options.
Yeah, so you could basically tailor your workday to your mood, right? Like one day you could be in a bustling shared space, feeling all energized and collaborative, and then the next day you could be tucked away in a quiet office, getting some focused work done.
Exactly. So in theory, that sounds pretty flexible, pretty ideal. But the question is, does all that flexibility actually lead to a better work-life balance?
Ooh, good point. Because you could also argue that it just blurs the lines between work and life even more.
Yeah, and that's something we're going to have to unpack a little bit further because they really push this whole work-life balance thing in their materials.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But I'm also curious about something else.
What's that?
Well, we saw that a lot of their upward mobility seems to be tied to sales roles.
Oh, you're right. Good catch.
So what do you make of that? Does that mean that Regus is really only a good fit for people who are super sales driven?
Well, it definitely suggests that a certain type of personality might thrive there.
Right, like someone who's competitive, maybe even a bit of a risk taker.
Exactly, and someone who doesn't mind, hustling a bit.
Yeah, because if you're not comfortable in that kind of environment, it might not be the best fit.
No, probably not. But it's interesting, isn't it, how they sort of try to balance this image of, work-life balance and flexibility with this underlying sales-driven culture.
Yeah, definitely something to think about.
For sure.
Okay, so another thing they talk a lot about is their use of technology.
Oh, yeah, they're all about AI and automation, trying to create this, like, super efficient, high-tech workspace.
Right, so they've got apps for everything. They're using AI to manage their spaces. I mean, it all sounds very futuristic, but is it a bit too impersonal?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? I mean, some people might love the idea of having an office that basically anticipates their needs.
Right, like adjusting the temperature, dimming the lights, that kind of thing.
Exactly. But for others, it might feel a bit too Big Brother-ish.
Yeah, like where's the human touch?
And that ties into a bigger question about Regus's overall vibe,
Yeah.
Are they all about efficiency and technology at the expense of everything else?
Right, like are they prioritizing the bottom line over the well-being of their employees?
That's something we're going to have to keep digging into. But for now, I think it's safe to say that Regus definitely have a very distinct personality, a very specific way of doing things.
Yeah, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing really depends on the individual, right? Okay, so there's one more thing we need to address before we move on.
Oh, what's that?
Well, it's a bit of a sensitive topic, but in our research, we came across some information that raised some concerns about honesty, about Regus's commitment to ethical practices.
Right. And we don't want to get into specifics here because, we're not trying to make any accusations or anything.
No, absolutely not, but we do feel like it's something that potential employees should be aware of.
Definitely. Because at the end of the day, you want to work for a company that aligns with your values.
Exactly. And if there are any red flags out there, it's better to know about them up front so you can do your own research and make an informed decision.
Right. So do your due diligence, check out those Glassdoor reviews, talk to people who've actually worked there, get the inside scoop.
Because what seems too good to be true often is, right?
Oftentimes, yeah.
So we've covered a lot of ground already, but there's still so much more to explore. So stay with us as we continue our deep dive into the world of Regus Careers.
We'll be back after a short break.
All right, so we've seen that Regus really likes to talk up their company culture and their marketing materials.
Oh, yeah, they're all about collaboration and innovation and all those buzzwords.
But you know how it is with these things. Every company wants to put their best foot forward, right?
Right, they're always going to highlight the positive stuff.
Exactly. So how do we know if what they're saying about their culture is actually true?
Well, I think one thing to look for is consistency.
Yeah.
If you see the same themes popping up over and over again, even in different sources, that's a good sign.
Oh, I see what you mean. So it's not just about one or two cherry-picked quotes. It's about looking for a pattern.
Exactly. And one thing that really stood out to me was their emphasis on teamwork.
Oh, interesting. So maybe it's not all about like cutthroat competition and climbing the corporate ladder.
Well, they definitely talk about ambition and growth, but they also seem to really value a supportive, collaborative environment.
That makes sense, especially given their global reach, right? Like if you're working with people from all over the world, you kind of have to be able to rely on each other.
Exactly. You can't just be in it for yourself. You have to be a team player.
Right, because you might be working on projects with people in different time zones, on different continents, so communication and collaboration are key.
Absolutely. And that makes me wonder if their culture might vary a bit from location to location.
Oh, yeah, good point. Like maybe the London office has a totally different vibe than the one in Tokyo or something.
It's possible, and it's something to keep in mind if you're considering an international move within Regus.
Right, because you wouldn't want to assume that every office is going to have that same, collaborative, supportive culture that they talk so much about.
No, definitely not. It's always best to do your research and get a feel for the specific location you're interested in.
Okay, so we've talked about teamwork, but what about innovation? They mention that a lot too, but what does that actually mean in practice?
Well, from what I've seen, they seem to encourage employees to come up with new ideas, to experiment, to not be afraid to push boundaries.
So it's not just about following the rules and doing things the way they've always been done.
No, it's about constantly looking for ways to improve, to innovate, to stay ahead of the curve.
Right, and I guess that makes sense in a way because they're in a pretty competitive industry, right? Like they have to constantly be innovating to stay relevant.
Exactly. And they also seem to be very forward-thinking when it comes to technology, which kind of ties into the whole innovation thing.
Yeah, because they're always talking about AI and automation and all that stuff.
Right. And while some people might find that exciting, others might worry that it's going to lead to a more impersonal work environment.
Yeah, like is there going to be any room for human connection and creativity if everything is being run by algorithms?
That's a valid concern. And it's something to think about. But I also think it's important to remember that technology can be a tool for good.
Right, like it can free up employees from doing tedious tasks so they can focus on more creative, fulfilling work.
Exactly. So it really depends on how it's implemented and how it's used.
Okay, so we've talked about teamwork and innovation, and we've touched on the potential downsides of their heavy reliance on technology. But what about the flexibility thing? Like, does all that flexibility actually translate into a better work-life balance?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because on the one hand, having the ability to work remotely, set your own hours, maybe even travel while you work, that could be amazing for your work-life balance.
Yeah, like imagine being able to like take your laptop to the beach or work from a cafe in Paris or something.
Right. It sounds idyllic, but the reality is that it takes a lot of discipline and self-management to make that kind of flexibility work for you.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Because if you're not careful, you could end up working all the time.
Exactly. And that's something that Regus doesn't really address in their materials.
Yeah.
They kind of present flexibility as this universally positive thing, but it's not that simple.
Right, because it can be a double-edged sword.
It can, and it's something to be aware of.
Okay, so we've talked about the good, the potentially challenging, and now I think it's time to circle back to that honesty issue that we mentioned earlier.
Oh, right, the elephant in the room.
Yeah, and I know we don't want to get into specifics, but I do think it's important to emphasize that this is something that potential employees should take seriously.
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, you want to work for a company that you trust, a company that aligns with your values.
Exactly. And if there are any questions about a company's ethics or transparency, it's important to do your due diligence and get to the bottom of it.
Right, because corporate culture and work-life balance, those things can be subjective, but ethics, that's a different story.
And I think that's a good place to leave it for now, but we'll definitely be coming back to this issue in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about what it actually takes to land a job at Regus.
Right, because we've talked about all these, big picture things like company culture and work-life balance.
But at the end of the day, you got to get your foot in the door, right?
Exactly. So let's look at what they actually say about the application process.
Okay, so in their materials, they hit all the usual points, tailor your resume, highlight your flexibility, all that jazz.
Standard stuff. But I think the real key here is to go beyond just checking those boxes.
What do you mean?
Well, anyone can say they're a team player or that they're passionate about innovation.
Right, it's easy to just parrot back what you see on their website.
Exactly. So what you really need to do is show them how your unique experiences and skills connect to what Regus is all about.
Oh, I see. So it's not just about telling them what they want to hear, it's about showing them why you're genuinely a good fit.
Precisely. And I think one way to do that is to think about it like telling a story. Yeah, like instead of just listing your accomplishments on your resume, you're weaving them into a narrative that demonstrates how those experiences have shaped you and prepared you to thrive at Regus.
Oh, I like that. So it's like you're giving them a glimpse into your journey and how it's led you to this point.
Exactly. And I think that kind of authenticity can really make you stand out from the crowd.
Yeah, because anyone can, copy and paste some buzzwords onto their resume, but it takes a bit more effort to really personalize it and make it your own.
And I think that effort is worth it because it shows that you're genuinely interested in the company and that you've taken the time to understand what they're all about.
Okay, so we've talked about tailoring your resume and highlighting your skills, but they also talk a lot about cultural fit.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one for them.
But what does that actually mean in practice? Like, how do you demonstrate that you're a good cultural fit?
Well, I think it comes down to understanding the values and behaviors that define the Regus work style.
Right, like the collaboration, the innovation, that kind of thing.
Exactly. But I also think it's important to be aware of the potential downsides of overemphasizing cultural fit.
Oh, like what?
Well, if you're only hiring people who fit a certain mold, you risk creating a monoculture.
Right, where everyone thinks and acts alike.
Exactly, and that can stifle creativity and innovation.
So it's like a balancing act, right? You want to find people who are a good fit, but you also want to make sure you're not excluding people who could bring valuable new perspectives.
Right, and I think that's something you might want to ask about during the interview process.
Oh, like how they foster diversity and inclusion.
Exactly, because a company that truly values innovation should be open to a range of viewpoints, not just a single right way of thinking.
That's a great point, and it really brings us back to what we were talking about earlier about doing your research and asking the right questions.
Because ultimately, the decision of whether or not to pursue a career with Regus is a personal one.
Right, there's no right or wrong answer.
Exactly, and what we've tried to do in this deep dive is give you the information and insights you need to make an informed choice.
We've covered a lot of ground, from the global scale and the emphasis on technology to the potential challenges of work-life balance and those lingering questions about transparency.
It's a lot to consider.
It is, but I think we've given our listeners a pretty good overview of what it's like to work at Regus, both the good and the bad.
I hope so. And I hope they feel empowered to make the best decision for themselves.
Me too. So here's a final thought to leave you with. Imagine Regus in 5 years.
Ooh, good one.
Will their vision of a flexible, tech-driven workplace have come to fruition? Or will the human element have gotten lost in the shuffle?
Only time will tell, but it's definitely something to think about as you navigate your own career journey.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the world of Regus Careers.
Thanks for joining us.
We hope you found it informative and, most importantly, that you feel equipped to make the best decision for your future.
Take care.